Let me read you a story, Gunk among the flowers. Every year in the spring, when the world is abloom, the garden becomes a riot of colors. For instance, the large tree at the bottom of the garden has bronze-brown leaves and a dark green mossy trunk. It is covered in a blossom of tiny bright yellow flowers. They fall from the tree in their thousands and cover the ground in a lush carpet of yellow gold. Like a child in autumn kicking up leaves, Gunk runs around and throws up enough of a flurry to make the carpet move like the waves of a sea. I can always see her when I'm looking out into the garden from my kitchen window. She has so much fun with this that she doesn't come inside my house for tea for several days. She just grabs her cookies and, stuffing them in her mouth, rushes out again to play. This spring, after 4 or 5 days, her game changed. Instead of picking up, throwing about and kicking around, Gunk started making shapes from the tiny yellow flowers. I had a lot of work to do that day, so I only saw her when I was standing in the kitchen, waiting for the kettle to boil. Each time, Gunk made more elaborate forms than the time before. It started with a ball, then a cape that she could actually wear. Next, the cape became so long and wide that she had trouble making turns as she trotted about. The last thing I saw her make was almost as large as a cat and roughly the same shape. I didn't get to see what else she made, as I had to go into town, but I was sure that she'd tell me all about it when she would finally come into my house for tea again. On my way back from town, 2 streets from my house, I saw the mailman and the police constable. This in itself wasn't so remarkable. Both of them spend a large part of the day walking the streets. The town isn't that big, and they run into each other on an almost daily basis. I've seen them talking or casually exchanging gossip often enough. But this time, however, it drew my attention. Maybe it was the fact that the mailman's face was rather pale, as if he just had a bit of a shock. Or maybe it was because he was sitting on the ground, his mailbag askew and his uniform rather disheveled. Or just maybe it was because the ground around the both of them was covered with familiar-looking yellow flowers. Whatever it was, I quickly walked over to them and, after greeting the constable, asked him what was going on. "I don't right know," the constable replied, with an inquisitive look. When I turned the corner, I swore I saw him, with a nod to the mailman, being dragged off by a fellow pulling on his mailbag. But when I got here, the fellow had disappeared. Looking around, the constable lifted his cap to wipe his forehead with his arm. "Must have run pretty fast to get away like that," he mumbled to himself. As we helped the mailman up from the ground, the constable asked him, "Did you manage to get a good look at his face?" The mailman had a look somewhere between confusion and bewilderment. "He didn't have no face," he blurted out. "Wearing a mask, eh?" the constable responded, as he wiped the little yellow petals from the mailman. "Kids these days, I don't know what they're coming to." The constable didn't seem to be paying much attention. He kept looking at his surroundings in a slightly pensive fashion. "And he was covered in flowers," the mailman garbled. "Yes, you do seem to be covered in the stuff," the constable replied, as he turned on the radio clipped to his shoulder strap. Whilst I was picking the last of the yellow flowers of the mailman, the police constable talked into his radio. "Be on the lookout for a kid wearing a jumpsuit. bright yellow, possibly wearing a mask. After giving some more instructions into his radio, the constable turned to us. The mailman still looked rather startled. He should be easy enough to spot running around in that collar. Well now, the constable continued, let's see if anything has gone missing, shall we? As the constable righted the mailman's bag, the mailman's look had gone from perplexed to merely befuddled. I left them both to it, and I headed home. There seemed to be a lot of little yellow flowers strewn about. It was almost as if there was a trail of flowers from the mailman to my house. Oh, this was a bit strange, as there aren't any trees in the street. Must have been the wind at work, I told myself, quickening my pace. When I got in, I got straight to the kitchen with the idea of looking out of the window to see if I could spot Gunk. I didn't have to bother, as she was sitting on the kitchen table looking impatient. It was about time you got back, she scolded me. I want some tea. When the kettle had boiled, I made tea and sat down at the kitchen table and asked Gunk what she had been up to. Oh, nothing much, Gunk said, failing to look as innocent as she might have hoped. Played around, went for a walk, you know. She took a big bite out of her chocolate cookie and sat there happily munching away. Looking out of the kitchen window, I noticed that there seemed to be a lot less of the little yellow flowers laying about. Or was that just my imagination? Did anything interesting happen on your walk? I casually asked. Not really, Gunk said, as she swallowed the last of her cookie and started on a new one. She was squirming in her seat. We were both quiet, and she went through some more cookies, and with each cookie she was squirming more, as if she was dying to tell me something. Just as I was pouring both of us another cup of tea, she shrieked, I got a postcard! She rushed out of the door and immediately returned with a crumpled piece of paper. Look, she said, it got my name on it and everything. On closer inspection, the piece of paper indeed seemed to be a postcard, albeit a rather tattered and worn specimen. It had Gunk's name on it, and a postage stamp, but not much else. Judging from the postmark, it appeared to have been stamped and mailed months ago. Gunk? I asked, probably failing to look as innocent as I had hoped. How did you get this? The same way you get yours, Gunk responded with a tone of indignation. From the mailman. But it doesn't have an address on it, I carefully continued. How would the mailman know where to post it? Gunk crossed her arms and looked at me angrily. I knew I was getting a postcard. I've been waiting for it forever. It's not my fault that the stupid man doesn't know how to give it to me. She was stamping her right foot as if emphasizing her words. With each stump, her hair stood more on edge and she looked more and more feral. You, stomp, get loads, stomp, and he never, stomp, brings me, stomp, any stomp. Her outburst done, Gunk settled her hair into place and calmly finished. He didn't feel like bringing me my mail, so I fetched it myself. And with one final haughty look, she turned around and left. Curious as I was, maybe this wasn't the best of times to ask Gunk who the postcard was from.